Nathan has killed a lot of people. Understatement of the century. The amount of people that Nathan has killed is insane, easily crossing the thousands, but not just being limited to people. However, the amount of PTSD the poor treasure hunter will have to endure is a topic for another day. For now, I wanted to discuss which villain in the Uncharted series has the most power. Which one would win in an all-out battle royale? Is it Navarre and Roman with their American mercenaries, Zoran and Flynn with their Eastern European mercenaries, Eddie Rajan's ragtag group of Indonesian pirates, Marlo and Talbot with their secret British order, Ramses with his Yemeni pirates, Dante with his also American mercenaries, Guerrero with his Panamanian insurgents, Michael and Rose with their Russian troops, Rafe and Nadine's South African shoreline, or a Saud's group of Indian insurgents? Now, first of all, I know Nathan's fought more people than just these armies, while excluding Assault, but I don't think every person he's fought classifies as an army. For me, an army in this game classifies if Nathan has fought either most or all of their members, and if they serve a legitimate threat/purpose to the game or other form of media. They also need to show that they have legit military tactics and armament/vehicles to use, which is why I say the Italian security guards and the Turkish museum guards don't count. To figure out who's truly the biggest baddie Nathan has ever encountered, we're going to have to judge these armies based on certain criteria, the fundamentals that I think essentially serve as valid criteria to judge an army's efficiency in. Number 1. Army size. Number 2. Army skill set. Number 3. Armaments and vehicles. Number 4. Track record and history. I think those are all pretty self-explanatory. They all work very well in synergy and are often taken into the most consideration when discussing real-world armies. Since there are about 10 armies here, I'll rank them from worst to best after each round is done, and the rank they sit at is also the number of points they earn after each round. Okay, so let's jump into the meat of things. Round 1, Army size. This is a fairly complicated yet also fairly easy round, if that makes any sense. For one thing, it's easy to rank these armies based on sheer numbers alone, but on another note, it's impossible to get an exact number of soldiers out of these armies. Some of the soldiers either die off screen to the supernatural creatures of the games, or there are scripted sequences throughout the levels that give you either a smaller or a larger amount of soldiers than typical. For instance, Eddie and Zoran's men weren't just killed by Nate, but also by the creatures that inhabited the area. Or for another thing, if you opt to be stealthy in certain areas of Uncharted 4, then you'll fight less soldiers than if you went all in, which would spawn in more. So, counting the amount of soldiers was both very hard but also fairly easy, if not also rather time consuming. I mean, some soldiers were very easy to count since we actually do end up killing them all, such as Ramses' Yemeni pirates, or we just see them all on screen. But yeah, some were just downright annoying. Eventually, I think I managed to reach numbers that I could fairly corroborate with other sources, those numbers being: Eddie has about 374 pirates, Roman and Navarre have about 176 mercenaries, Zoran and Flynn have around 812 soldiers, Marlo and Talbot's order has about 423 members, Ramses has about 162 pirates, Guerrero has around 383 insurgents, Dante has about 189 mercenaries, Michael and Rose have about 5 soldiers, Rafe and Nadine's shoreline consists of about 467 mercenaries, Asaf has approximately 273 insurgents. Again, almost none of these numbers are exact, but we can safely assume that the soldiers that died off screen or any numbers I may have miscounted by a bit are rather minor amounts. So I think you know what order I'm going to rank them in. In last place, we have Michael and Rose Dirty for their pathetic amounts of soldiers. They get 1 point. In 9th place, we have Ramses' Yemeni pirates. They get 2 points. In 8th place, we have Roman and Navarre's mercenaries. They get 3 points. In 7th place, we have Dante's mercenaries. They get 4 points. In 6th place, we have Asaf's insurgents. They get 5 points. In 5th place, we have Eddie's pirates. They get 6 points. In 4th place, we have Guerrero's insurgents. They get 7 points. In 3rd place, we give the bronze reward to Marlo and Talbot's order. They get 8 points. In 2nd place, we give the silver reward to Rafe and Nadine's shoreline. They get 9 points. And in 1st place, the gold reward goes to Zoran and Flynn's soldiers. They get 10 points. Round 2, Army skill set. This will judge both their military tactics as well as skill with their weapons and combat abilities. This will also be judging the leaders' prowess. Now, one thing that I think we all need to clarify is that all of these men are, at the very least, ex-military. That's just how mercenaries work. The leaders wouldn't hire a bunch of amateur street punks. The men must have at least a little military experience, otherwise they wouldn't be accepted to begin with. Plus, you can also tell with a lot of their physiques. They almost certainly didn't get ripped without at least some form of military training. Maybe you could argue against this with the pirates, but I doubt the insurgents and especially the soldiers that dress like these. So, from what we got, let's see how we can rank them and how we can't. Let's go in order from our worst to best ranked last round. Michael and Rose don't necessarily tend to express any sort of military tactics. Their men are confirmed to be ex-military, but they're more so basket cases with their leadership, as they saw the expedition as a personal ride rather than as a mission. Rose Dirty has shown impressive combat abilities and managed to best Chloe in combat, but when her crew only consists of 5 members, she will more than likely not get an opportunity to use this at all, especially since they couldn't even tie a knot. So, unfortunately for the Dirties, their skills isn't anything that merits any sort of mention. Ramses' Yemeni pirates don't seem to express any sort of tactics either. For one thing, their physiques are definitely nothing to gloss about, and given how they survive in the harsh conditions of the ship graveyard is also rather impressive. But they're lacking in numbers compared to the other soldiers, and they don't seem to fight with too much of an adequate technique. His men are usually stationed across the graveyard in large amounts, but given how they're familiar with the environment, it's not anything terribly impressive. They don't even seem to carry any sort of equipment that strongly signifies above average practicality, such as vests and combat uniforms. Ramses doesn't have any moments that help him shine as a leader either. He's always sitting backstage and opts to veer his ugly head once his enemy is trapped by his men. We also unfortunately get no moments of him fighting or shooting, so we can't get a good idea of his skill set either and how much it passes on to his men. But judging by how he keeps the pistol tucked by his crotch, it probably wouldn't be anything too great if not a bit clout-seeking anyway. Roman and Navarre are actually pretty decent. For one thing, their men possess much better equipment. They appropriately wear combat uniforms, maintain regular contact with their leaders, and although their numbers are a bit lacking, their equipment and skill set probably make up for that enough. Their men fight identically to Eddie's pirates for gameplay purposes, but we could assume given their military background they fight much better than just using specific boxing style punches. We actually do see Navarre leading the men, as is appropriate given his status as lieutenant. Speaking of Navarre, we also do see him in combat, and he isn't too bad either. Roman is probably not at the age to fight anymore, but he is still cruel and cold, willing to snatch treasure out of enemy hands before killing them in cold blood. Both Roman and Navarre are also willing to step onto the battlefield if need be, meaning they're not entirely sideline leaders. So, thus far, not so bad, actually pretty decent, only issue being their fairly small numbers. Dante's mercenaries are also pretty decent. They share practically all of the strengths and weaknesses as Roman and Navarre's men. Their numbers are fairly lacking, and they have practically identical equipment. Dante, however, easily has the most armored minigunners out of every army, so that'll definitely give him a bit of an edge. The army is only a bit held back by Dante also being more of a clout chaser rather than a legit military leader. That's why he hired them in the first place, as well as even ordered them to save Guerrero for himself to finish him off out of spite. Dante is actually really good at combat however, utilizing Kali knife fighting patterns as well as boxing techniques of faking out his attacks. Even Nathan's attempts of disarming him failed. So overall, despite his small numbers, his armored military men make up for that as well as Dante's skill. Unfortunately, we don't get any moments of his men expressing combat abilities, they're just given Zoran's moves, so I'd class him as being fairly similar to Roman's men given their American background. Asav's insurgents is a bit of a funny case. Given how they're insurgents, I don't expect too much combat prowess out of them, which is fitting since we don't see any abilities out of them either. A lot of the time, they're actually depicted as clout chasers similar to Dante but not his men in Ramses. They fight almost identically to Shoreline, but again, I'd assume these guys would fight similarly to Ramses' pirates rather than a group of ex-military personnel. However, while his insurgents aren't too practical, Asav himself is genuinely a pretty good leader. Besides just his combat skills, he positions his men in good amounts and in good areas. He leaves his equipment everywhere, which makes it easy to restock whenever necessary. He also commands his men, who always maintain regular contact with him. The insurgents also seem well equipped with their uniforms and weapons. Then there's Asav's fighting capabilities. Undoubtedly one of the best fighters in Uncharted, and thus far the best fighter out of the militaries. I don't think his men retain its influence however, otherwise there wouldn't be rather ineptitude in cloud chasing. But if there's one thing different from about Asav from the others, is that he and his men more so prefer remaining and fighting underground when faced against more devious opponents, as shown when fighting against the Indian army. But besides that, Asav is definitely able to hold his own as well as his army. His numbers aren't anything to gloss about either. All in all, a solid combatant. Eddie's pirates strike me as similar to Ramses' pirates. They, as well as Eddie, most certainly do chase for clout when in combat. We don't get any combat moments out of them. I do think however that the way they fight in gameplay is probably an accurate showcase given how limited a lot of their moves are. They don't seem to maintain any radio contact with Eddie, however that doesn't stop them from being well positioned throughout the environment. Eddie has much better numbers than Ramses, and so positioning them in large numbers across the battlefield isn't a bad idea. He's also willing to enter the battlefield personally if need be, which is a good sign of a good leader. He also does seem to place his equipment around the area in crates. However, their equipment isn't anything that merits too much mention. His men are also built smaller than Ramses' men, but I'd say they make up for that with their superior numbers, over double of Ramses' men. All in all, the numbers are definitely their biggest advantage. Whereas insurgents are practically the same as Asav's, just larger numbers and different heritage. They seem to have mostly appropriate uniforms and equipment. They don't maintain radio contact with Guerrero however, and their usefulness can often be called into question as there are moments where they get distracted, struggle to accomplish a mission, or just plain contemplate fighting, which is more understandable given their military experience. They fight identically to Zoran's men, but I'd say they'd fight similarly to Asav's insurgents. Guerrero has also fought, and he doesn't seem too bad, although not as good as Asav, but he does seem rather quick with his moves and attacks appropriately. Unfortunately, he was fighting Nathan. His large size does give him a bit of an edge, but his men's general sizes besides the occasional buffed one doesn't accentuate this too well. Overall, not too different from Asap, just better numbers, no radio contact, and a less skilled leader. Marlowe and Talbot's order is a very interesting one that I'm still fairly unsure with how to judge. For one thing, they more so resemble undercover agents rather than soldiers and rely on different strategies to win. Unlike the others, which are almost solely reliant on force and weapons, Marlowe and Talbot will also utilize fear to get what they want, which will certainly be effective to the more so clout-chasing mercenaries, but I don't think it is just limited to them. Since they're spies, they'll also dress up in appropriate clothing if need be. This is rather major, as they could take advantage of dead enemies as clothing and defeat their opposing armies from the inside, drugging them and killing them without leaving a trace. Even without these stealthier tactics, however, they do seem to be very capable on their own. I'll discuss this furthermore in the history and track record round since I think this applies to them most, but before that there are other things to discuss. As spies, they most likely always maintain radio contact, as seen with their earpieces with their leaders. Talbot is nothing to gloss about either. He's almost always out on the field doing work as he's easily the most skilled one in the army. He utilizes Kali-style knife fighting and boxing techniques similar to Dante, but with a lot less clout. He's more focused and aware of his mission, making him deadlier when combined with his skill. Development of Uncharted 3 had the goal of making Talbot an anti-Drake, almost as good as Nate in every way. This is a big issue as the main reason all of these armies fell is due to Nate, but as seen, he isn't as good as him and doesn't retain his luck, which is the main drawback of Talbot. But he does show good signs of being a good leader with his men. He doesn't abuse or kill them unlike Guerrero. Milo is incapable of Talbot's feats and so she may hang back more than Talbot will, but I'd say when they're all combined, their efforts are easily the deadliest thus far. Add that to their numbers being the third highest and we get a very deadly army. Maybe a bit different or difficult even to rank them, however, given how different they are to everyone else. Now we reach Rafe and Nadine's shoreline. We finally return to the original formula of classic boom boom shoot the gun armies. Shoreline most certainly comes packed with great equipment and much like Eddie and Zav, have it stationed all across their inhabited environments. They maintain radio contact at all times with Nadine, but they also do seem to carry a bit more of a temper compared to the other soldiers. Nadine and Rafe will also enter the battlefield when need be, and although they don't always see eye to eye, they will eventually work together. However, their differing ideologies may clash a bit awkwardly during the fight. Shoreline under Nadine's control is usually very reckless, blowing crap up mindlessly and making wrong moves that could have easily been avoided if a bit more thought and care went into it. Rafe, however, unless he's fighting a personal battle, takes a bolder and more cautious approach, so it's unclear who'd have more complete control here unless they duke it out to the death for control. But speaking of duking things out, the way the army fights is actually very well. They'll use arm bars both with their arms as well as using their weapons to trap them into submission, and it all works very well. Their basic sparring techniques are identical to Nathan's, and we get no other moments throughout the games where their techniques shine, but I'd say it's safe to assume that they're similar to Zoran's men. Nadine and Rafe also have moments to shine in combat. Nadine has good flexibility and prefers more combat-oriented attacks, but the issue with this is, if you're able to break out of it, which isn't too difficult, then she'll be left rather helpless to defend herself. She certainly does have a tough attitude towards combat, but given how everyone she's fought has defeated her in combat, I'm also view it as needless chest beating at best. She would be able to shine in certain fights, but given the tougher and more skillful exterior of the other armies, I don't think she'd fare too well. Rafe is also very skilled in combat. He's an amazing hammer and fencing practitioner, and even seems rather capable at hand-to-hand combat, more than Nadine I'd argue. However, Rafe does most certainly have a worse mental stability over Nadine, even if Nadine and her army aren't too calm most of the time. Overall, pretty good. Well-skilled group of ex-military soldiers with very impressive numbers as well. The things holding them back is the collide for power over who leads who in the army, as well as their often lack of patience. Soren and Flynn time now, baby. Now, first we need to address the elephant in the room. They have the largest army out of everyone here, and it's no contest, which fortunately is synergized by their military skill. The army is most certainly well equipped, retaining amazing military techniques in hand-to-hand combat as well as leadership. Zoran also tends to control his men through both force and fear. He's willing to kill them to send a message, and he's easily the most insane out of everyone here, holding no moral ambiguity or concern for lives besides those he wants to kill. He's an ex-Soviet intelligence officer, so in other words an ex-Soviet spy, meaning he most certainly does retain amazing skill, which is accentuated well with his lieutenant Draza as well as his men, cleverly utilizing arm bars and wrist locks to suspend their enemies, using quick combo structures to bash them down into submission. Draza has a great physique too and expresses more than just simple combat knowledge with his tendency of blocking Nathan and countering him. Unfortunately, and this is a big issue for me, we never actually see Zoran fight. We have good ideas with how good he could fight, especially when we consider his army's skill, but we never see him duke it out with anyone. The closest we get is at the end of the game, when he uses moves that make good use of his absurd strength, not actual skill. So unfortunately, I can't give Zoran's skill too much credit here, besides his military leadership and the fact that he may often even enter the battlefield himself. Oh, and Flynn's also here. To be frank, Flynn isn't anything too special. He can't hold his own very well at all and is overly cocky with his flair, underestimating his foes more than thinking things through. We don't get many moments of skill out of him, but I wouldn't assume it's anything too special anyway. So, with all that being said, once you add Zoran's insane numbers of soldiers at his disposal, he's easily the best one here. Ranking them wasn't easy at all, but I think I came to a general understanding of which army is truly best here. In last place we have an easy pick, Michael and Rose. The smallest numbers are already a bottom pick for me, but given their lack of skill and more so tendency of blindly going and swinging, they don't seem terribly fit for this fight at all. They get another 1 point. In 9th place, we have Ramses' Yemeni pirates once again. Their leaders' more so clout-seeking tendencies will most certainly not shine against most of these armies, especially their bolder tendencies. Their techniques won't be as effective when in environments they're unfamiliar with, and they also have the second smallest numbers out of everyone here. Their physique and larger numbers are what keeps them out of last, as well as with how they're capable of holding their own in such harsh environments, but that's really it. They also, once again, receive another 2 points. In 8th place, I'm going to give this to Eddie. All of the issues with Ramses apply here, however they don't have the physique or adaptability to make up for their clout mentality. Their techniques and equipment aren't anything too special either, albeit their numbers are impressive, what made me put them above Ramses, but that's really all they have going for them. They receive 3 points. In 7th place, I'm giving the spot to Assassin Surgeons. Good equipment and numbers, but his men's ineptitude and more inconspicuous technique, which requires them to lay low, won't do them any favors in this fight. Although they do have higher numbers than Dante and Roman, we see in either game that although they have lower numbers than their counterparts, Eddie and Guerrero, that didn't stop them from defeating them with greater skill. Assav's combat skill won't shine much here either, since he will largely be fights against their armies, which I don't think he will have the power to keep up with the others, so he gets 4 points here. In 6th place, I gotta give this to Guerrero. Higher numbers than Assav and similarly trained men means he definitely has an edge over their army. Although Guerrero isn't as skilled in hand-to-hand combat as Assav, as stated before, that won't play too much of an issue unless he can somehow get into close quarters with him, which he'll be incapable of doing most likely. But we can safely place everyone else above Guerrero since he was incapable of handling Dante's army with his own one. He gets 5 points. In 5th place, I'm going to put Dante here. Better trained and equipped men than everyone else thus far gives him an edge even if his numbers are smaller. Although he has higher numbers than Roman and Navarro, the reason I'm putting him lower is because of his less focused and more clout-chasing mentality, which will definitely impact his leadership in comparison to Roman and Navarro. Still though, it's a very close match. He gets 6 points. In 4th place, you guessed it, is Roman and Navarro. Similar trained and equipped men to Dante, the only real edge they have is their superior leadership. They most certainly don't have the training, numbers, or techniques to take on the other armies higher in this list, however. They do rest comfortably in 4th place though. They get 7 points. In 3rd place, the Bronze War goes to Shoreline. Great numbers, skill set, and equipment only drawn back by the differing ideologies of the leaders. One's more reckless mannerisms and the other's bolder and more cautious approach will definitely make things awkward when fighting against the more focused armies' tactics. This could be used to their advantage, but they probably wouldn't see it that way. They don't have the tactics and maybe the skill to counteract Marlowe and Talbot's order, even if they have slightly superior numbers. Still though, Bronze is a pretty good spot. They get 8 points. In 2nd place, the silver reward goes to the Order. Talbot's great leadership techniques and field of expertise combined with the Order's bolder and deadly techniques of manipulation is a great feat of skill. They have great numbers and serviceable equipment, even if they dress differently. Talbot's anti-drag characteristics will definitely make it difficult to defeat him both in hand-to-hand combat and shootouts. Marlowe, also being laid back, works in great synergy with Talbot on the field as the two can communicate with each other easier. Although they do more so resemble spies and are required to be inconspicuous similar to Assav in order to work best, they do still show great military skills even when detected. The drawback with them is that their numbers are lacking compared to Zoran's by a long shot, and Lazarevich's experience as a spy could help him identify their tactics and counter them better. So though, silver is very good. They get 9 points. In 1st place with the gold reward, we gotta give it to Zoran and Flynn. The best numbers and equipment as well as best military tactics combined with Zoran's ex-Soviet spy works makes him very deadly in combat. With a more stable military setup and posture too, Zoran certainly earns his mark over the rest here. Although he and Flynn don't particularly get along, I'm sure we can figure out who definitely has power over the other here. So all in all, while it's a very close match with the top 3, Lazarevich edges out, he and Flynn get another 10 points. We're halfway through now, and so let's go with the points thus far. In last place, we have Michael and Rose resting at 2 points. In 9th place, we have Ramses with 4 points. In 8th place, we have a two-way tie for 8th and 7th, those being Assav and Eddie both resting at 9 points. In 6th place, we have Yet another two-way tie for 6th and 5th, those being Dante and Roman/Navarro, both resting at 10 points. In 4th place, we have Guerrero at 12 points. In 3rd place, we have yet another two-way tie for 3rd and 2nd between Shoreline and The Order, both resting at 17 points. And in 1st place, we have Zorn and Flynn resting at 20 points. Looks like they're going to run away with this thing, but not so fast because we have 2 more rounds to go over here. Round 3, Armaments and Vehicles. We've kind of already covered the efficiency of the armaments with each army thus far. Some of the armies use identical weapons, for instance Eddie and Guerrero both utilize AKs and Zorn and Roman both utilize M4s. But then there are some that use very different weapons, for instance Asav. But given how the armies are already ranked, I'd say we don't need to necessarily cover armaments since they're already at a reasonable spot based on weapons efficiency compared to others. But what really turns the tide here are the vehicles that each army utilizes, both in terms of power but also manufacturers. They play a role here. Let's go in the same order we went last round, from worst to best. Rose and Michael only have one vehicle, that being a plane. Just one plane. Okay, I feel so mean now. Thus far, it's just been egging on Michael and Rose Daddy thus far, and boy oh boy, I feel so bad here. But it's not like they were nice people, so shock them. With one vehicle, that being a plane with no combat capabilities, they'd probably only use it to escape or get shot down. The manufacturer doesn't even matter in this case, with only 5 soldiers and 1 plane. Ramses is an interesting case here. He has no ground vehicles, which is a huge issue when against people that primarily utilize ground vehicles. He's primarily amphibious. However, he doesn't even tend to shine in this too well either. He has only about 4 ships, one being an ocean liner. Plus, with his small crew, he could only use them for transportation rather than offense. So all in all, very useless. Next is Eddie. Okay, so now we reach people with a good number of vehicles. Eddie has 56 vehicles in total, which consists of 8 Mercedes-Benz Unimogs, 19 Honda ATC 250s, 16 motorcycles, 9 boats, and 4 Jeeps overall, built up of Kawasaki KLF 300s, Kaiser Jeep M15s, and Toyota Land Cruisers. It's built off of Western and Eastern vehicles, such as Japanese and German. However, none of these are terribly special. Obviously, they dominate everyone else thus far, but that's not saying much. Plus, analysing the conditions of the vehicles, I can't tell if he's trying to camouflage them or if they're kept in unideal conditions. Most likely the latter. Still though, very good supply of vehicles at his disposal with great manufacturers. Up next is Asav. Asav has 54 vehicles in total. He has 12 Jeep Wranglers, 21 trucks, which consist of Oshkosh FMTVs and MTVRs, 19 Kawasaki motorcycles, I think, and 2 Teradyne Gurkha MPVs. Right off the bat, he has much more advanced vehicles, the reinforced ones thus far. Well, the first ones at least. The vehicles are all Western too, and seem to be in much better condition than Eddie's vehicles. So thus far, this definitely gives him an edge over the other armies, even with his ineptitude army. Pretty cool stuff. Now we have Guerrero. Guerrero only has 10 vehicles at his disposal, one of the lowest thus far, which consists of 1 Land Rover, 9 trucks consisting of 1955 Chevrolet Task Force 3800s and Dodge D200s, and nothing else. He's very lacking in his vehicles, which is a big issue since his army size is very big. He won't even be capable of transporting his entire army, which isn't a huge deal since he will need to reserve some to protect himself anyway. Although they're Western vehicles, specifically American, given their small numbers and lack of combat capabilities, they won't be all that useful when in the field. He does have a number of turrets, however, but that means he'll either have to use the trucks for transportation or for combat, but not for both. He could split the uses, but he'll have to sacrifice either army positioning or offense moves for either to work. Not very viable, unfortunately. Now we have Dante. Now, Dante and Roman share identical issues, that being, well, neither of the armies have any vehicles besides 1 helicopter. Dante possesses a YH-1 Cherokees, but that's it. So there's really not much to say here. It has both offense and transportation capabilities, which he could execute simultaneously given his smaller numbers, but he doesn't have much at his disposal at all. Rather lacking. So, with that being said, next up we once again have Roman and Navarro. They share the same strengths and weaknesses as Dante. Since they only have 1 helicopter and a very small army size, it won't do them any favors. Once again, rather lacking. Okay, now things get interesting. Next, we discuss Shoreline. To put it simply, Shoreline's vehicle status is amazing. They have 55 vehicles, 2 Teradyne Gurkha MPVs, 17 trucks consisting of Oshkosh FMTVs MTVRs, 8 Jeeps split between 1987 and 1 Jeep Wranglers, sound familiar, 11 Kawasaki D-Tracker motorcycles, and 16 ships. They're exclusively Western, built up of American and Canadian vehicles that seem kept in great conditions. They have the best versatility thus far, land, ground, and even air as shown in Lost Legacy with their helicopter, even if they only have 1. There really isn't too much holding Shoreline back in this one. They have amazing versatility and are extremely powerful. Amazing variety. Now we reach Milo and Talbot's The Order. Not as good as Shoreline, still pretty good. They have 37 vehicles, 14 Land Rover Defenders, approximately 16 trucks consisting of AM General M939 and Oshkosh FMTVs, and 97 1986 Honda TR200 Fat Cat motorcycles. There's nothing too extreme in this arsenal, however it is a pretty impressive supply of vehicles kept in good condition. They're mostly Western and some Eastern too as a plus. The drawback is that there's nothing here too special compared to Shoreline and they only have 37 vehicles. All in all though, not too shabby. Okay, Zorn and Flynn win this again, you all saw that coming. Approximately 87 vehicles, 3 Uralvagonzavod T64 tanks, 1 GMC M42, 41 trucks consisting of Kraz 255B and Dodge D series, 36 UAZs 469B Jeeps, and the first one to have more than one helicopter, 3 Mi-24 Hind attack helicopters to be exact. Now, what's interesting to note is that they're mostly Soviet technology. Soviet technology isn't quite as stable or as efficient as in Western, especially American technology, but as the only person with tanks and helicopters with more attack prowess beyond a minigun, not to mention they seem to be in great condition, yeah, Lazarus definitely takes the win here, especially with his much higher number of vehicles at his disposal. So now all that's left is to rank him, which will be a bit difficult for some of them, but not all. In last place we have Michael Rose Dirty once again. One plane isn't enough to counter everyone here, especially with an army as small as theirs. They once again get 1 point, moving on. Next in 9th place we have... Okay, this is a bit difficult. Roman, Dante, and Ramses are fairly useless with their very limited vehicles, but to be honest, I gotta put Dante here, but only by a very slight amount. He has the most soldiers out of Roman and Ramses thus far, and so he will need better means of transportation than just a single helicopter. So he gets 2 points. Next in 8th are Roman and Navarre. They share identical issues with Dante. One helicopter is a sufficient transportation method to suit their army that's built similarly to Dante's. They get 3 points. Next in 7th is Ramses. Must feel nice to break out of 9th place, but not by much of an edge at all. He has more vehicles than Roman and Dante, but his vehicles are still fairly useless. While everyone's on land, he's in the water. You could say he could attack via ocean as a vantage spot, but given that we've seen him on land before, shows he's willing to fight on land. Plus, without access to the ocean, he won't even be able to use his vehicles. So why isn't he second last? Well, because if in a situation where he has even minimal access to sea, even if via a river, then he could use it as a minor vantage spot, more so than just one helicopter. But still, also fairly useless, especially when you consider that he isn't even the only one who fights on water and doesn't even have the most ships. But to less extent than Dante Navarro given his smaller army, he gets 4 points. In 6th place is Guerra. With only 10 vehicles and an army the size of his, he can't successfully transport them all, nor can he use them as offense. It'll be a cluttered and sloppy system for him, especially when compared to the others higher on this list. So I can't see him doing anything major. He gets 5 points. In 5th place is Eddie. With the second highest vehicle count and a more versatile array, he is most certainly serviceable, especially when you consider his high numbers. The issue is his vehicles aren't as advanced as everyone else's higher on this list, and they're kept in questionable condition. Still though, being able to fight on both ground and sea is very good. He earns a solid 6 points. In 4th place is Milo Talbot's The Order, a good number of vehicles that are also fairly advanced in condition. The issue is they have no means of countering the more advanced vehicles higher on this list, and they don't seem to have nearly as many as everyone else higher than them, even Eddie. Still though, with superior training and numbers as well as better kept vehicles, I gotta put them higher than Eddie. They get 7 points. In 3rd place, the Bronze War goes to Asaf. With the near identical number of vehicles as Shoreline, he most certainly does come packed, which is surprising given how his army isn't too great. He most certainly does come packing compared to The Order, and it would be a close match to Shoreline in my eyes. But to be honest, I think Shoreline just barely edges out. Still though, with the power he's packing and his larger numbers of vehicles compared with his army size, they all do work very well in synergy. He gets 8 points. In 2nd place, the silver reward goes to Shoreline. A very close match to Assassin's Surgeons, however Shoreline shines better in versatility. Aerial, terrestrial, and aquatic are beyond Assaf's fields of expertise by a considerable amount, not to mention their larger army size works in better synergy than Assaf's smaller amounts of men. They get 9 points. In 1st place, gold goes to Zorn and Flynn. I don't even need to say much here. The higher amounts of vehicles, the most powerful by a long shot, and the highest army size makes it very fitting for him to have such variety. The only issue is that he has no means of aquatic transportation besides the attack helicopters, but that's all he really needs. He may not be the most versatile out of them all, but that power gap is too significant to gloss over about. He gets another 10 points. final round, history and track record. This will take into consideration the successes of their armies as well as their motivations and how well their heritage stacks up against one another. This will be an interesting one as it will help set out some of these armies. Let's go in the same order as last round's ranking from worst to best. As stated before, Michael and Rose's men are Russian. Now, often depicted in media as very tough, but showing to not be the brightest bulbs in the box. Michael and Rose being English, however, I'm pretty sure, but not necessarily possessing any sort of special English training. I'm prolonging this to be honest, because even if they were the toughest people in the world, their pathetic numbers wouldn't allow them to succeed. With Dante, there's nothing to state here that it hasn't already been stated. He's American and possesses a lot of money, similar to Rafe. He often lets his ego and arrogance get the better of him as well, which won't do any favors. Again, nothing here to say that hasn't already been stated. But one thing worth noting is that his army is very recent, as he hired them within the same game he was introduced into. Roman and Navarro. Navarro was plucked from a life of poverty in the slums of an unknown South American city by Roman, who recognized the boy's intelligence. He made him his trusty lieutenant as a result of it. Roman became oblivious to any sort of schemes that Navarro carried a great chance of committing, whereas everyone else didn't. Gabriel himself is a cold man, as stated before, willing to snatch treasure out of his opponent's hands before killing them in cold blood. He's a collector of antiquities from across the world, meaning he definitely has more experience with his army. That's really all that merits mention here, to be honest. We get no stories regarding the success of their army, but the added layer of backstory does help them give a bit of an edge. Ramses is a Yemeni pirate who sails through the Gulf of Aden looting ships. The Gulf of Aden is a peninsula located in between Somalia and Yemen and has commonly been the hunting ground for NATO, who will be mentioned later in this list, for Operation Ocean Shield. Given how Ramses most likely doesn't fight any sort of armies in order to loot their treasure, it's safe to say he won't have much experience fighting militias. They are pirates after all. He may have had a few scuffles for NATO, but given his small crew, it probably wouldn't be anything too major, especially since pirates aren't a huge threat. Not to mention their small numbers not doing them any favors either. Then there's also the fact that his HQ being a ship graveyard means that any expeditions outside of his known zone will be a bit of a no-no. Guerrero is a general of his army. He does have military experience too. He led a revolution of Panama and even has influence in South American countries. Now, the National Security Forces of Panama doesn't have a standing army. In fact, they, alongside with Costa Rica, abolished it, meaning that Panama in fact retains a small paramilitary security force which Guerrero failed to defeat in this revolution. There are about 26,000 members of the army, which makes it more understandable, especially considering Guerrero's military ineptitude. He did certainly leave an impact, however, given how he was wanted for war crimes. Still though, he'll have to do better than leave an impact in Panama to last long on this fight. Eddie doesn't have as extensive an influence as Guerrero, but I'd say he's a more viable option. He inherited his father's fortune and most likely the army too. That's really all we got from him besides his ongoing scams across Indonesia as well as his sister Rika Raja. But one thing that's worth mentioning is that Indonesians aren't particularly the most capable people in the world, or even in Southeastern Asia, not only due to their small size, but also because they aren't terribly practical. Just look at the East Timorese crisis in 1999 when Indonesians fought Australians. Despite the Indonesian army being much larger than the Australian one, they were held back embarrassingly well by the Australians. So, nothing too impressive to see here if we haven't already established that. Add that to Eddie's cocky attitude, and yeah, that makes the situation a bit worse. Now we have the Order. Okay, this is an interesting one. The Order is a secret service that has existed ever since Queen Elizabeth I's time. They're funded by the government as well, meaning that they're not an illegal group. Given their influence throughout history in Great Britain, this will make them very deadly. As stated before, their spy influence will require a ton of training and most of their life's worth of experience to maintain their status. Just check out SAS soldiers that fought in the Falkland Islands. They will take on larger numbers of Argentine soldiers and still come out on top with minimal casualties. Talbot shows as well, with his insane durability and great skill only really matched by Nathan's. This all definitely gives him an edge, easily top tier. To be honest, Assav is a little less impressive. He has history of being a doctor, which does give him extensive knowledge of more fatal organs and nerves, but that's about it. He's also hunted down by the Indian army, but it's not necessarily a case of him countering the army as he lays low underground and doesn't have the vehicles capable of rivaling them either. The Indian army is one of the most powerful armies in the world, as India is the second highest populated country in the world. So Asav's influence pissing them off is most certainly impressive, even if he isn't directly fighting the army, but more so pillaging poor cities and villages in search for the treasure. Still though, very impressive. Asav may also have the bomb, but he has no means of actually using it in combat since he doesn't have the transportation methods without risking leaving it vulnerable on the battlefield. Still though, rather impressive, but I'd still put Marlon Talbot's Order higher. Shoreline is a very interesting one. Besides their corruption, they've led expeditions in many countries around the world. Mostly African countries, and hey, even the country I'm from, that's actually very cool. The issue is though, most of their fights didn't pan out for them. It got so bad to the point that they lost a significant amount of their finances during these failed civil wars, to the point Elena speculated that they were working for Rafe to acquire Avery's treasure as a means of redemption if anything. Which is plausible given Nadine's reckless tendencies as stated before, meaning that their efficiency is questionable even with their numbers in troops and vehicles. Rafe is also very rich, much like Dante, however he doesn't have much military experience at all, albeit he seems solid. Still though, an interesting batch of soldiers built up from people all across the world. Zoran is also a very interesting case. Born in Yugoslavia and serving time as an ex-Soviet intelligence officer, he'd eventually grow a thirst for grievance. He was so ruthless that he was hunted down by NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and even managed to successfully take the capital of Nepal, Kathmandu. Now, he must have had a way to transport his army into the city itself, either through India or China, as Kathmandu is in the middle of the country, meaning that we could safely assume he took more of the country than just the capital. The Nepali army, or technically the Gurkhali army, is the armed force of Nepal that consists of about 98,000 active duty, larger than Guerrero's number in Panama and significantly larger than Zoran's amount of soldiers. Nepal has strong military significance across the globe, often considered second in terms of troop contribution, and so for Zoran to take the capital, that would mean defeating parts of the military, maybe even the brutal Gurkhas. That instantly puts him above everyone else in this list, no contest. Flynn doesn't even need to be mentioned, all we know is that he's a slippery snake of a thief but isn't willing to stand up to Zoran. With all that stated, we can finally rank the armies one last time and determine who is more likely to win. In last place, we have Michael and Rose Doty once again. Nothing merits mention about them whatsoever, they're way too small and weak to handle everyone here. They get once again 1 point. In ninth place, we have Ramses once again. Being a Yemeni pirate means he most likely has little to no experience in the military besides preying on the weak and possibly some scuffles with NATO. Plus, being Yemeni means he more than likely isn't terribly capable given Arab's general impracticality with war. He gets 2 points. His reign really didn't last long. In 8th place, we have Guerrero. Failing at serving as a significant threat to Panama as well as failing to Dante's more advanced yet also smaller army means he will probably not last too long against most of the people here with more advanced tactics and history. So Guerrero gets 3 points. In 7th place, I gotta put Eddie here. Eddie really doesn't have much going for him, good numbers and vehicles, but given his lack in the military, I can't really give him too much credit. Add that to his cockiness and yeah, he doesn't serve well here. He barely edges out over Guerrero given his larger numbers of vehicles, but by a tiny as hell amount. He gets 4 points. In 6th place, I could put Dante here, but it's a close one. Since we don't have too much backstory with Dante and Roman's armies, we can only judge them based on everything we've dissected from them thus far. Typical advanced American mercenary groups are really it, but given how Roman most likely has a greater history looting antiquities around the world with his army, unlike Dante who'd hired his armies in Golden Abyss, we can assume Navarro edges out over Dante. They both share the same weaknesses of only having one vehicle however, so Dante gets 5 points. In 5th place, I could put Roman and Navarro here. The reasoning of Dante also applies here, limited vehicles and basic relevance. Nothing too interesting, but given their tech and armaments, they could fare well. They get 6 points. In 4th, we have Asav. He easily beats everyone ranked here with vehicles alone, but his soldiers' ineptitude could play an issue if everyone else finds a way to destroy his best vehicles. I put him below the order because they have superior training by a long shot most likely. Given their spy tendencies, they could find a way to sabotage Asav from the inside. However, it's a very close one given the order's lack of tanky vehicles. One could argue who beats who here, but the training and numbers advantage of Talbot is too much to gloss over, especially if they use explosives. As we saw with Chloe, hiding in the grass and slowly depleting the health is a good tactic, which is probably similar to what the Order would do anyway, so I gotta give Asav the 7 points. In 3rd place, the Bronze War goes to Shoreline. More versatility and better training than the other armies listed, they most certainly will be capable of holding their own against everyone already mentioned here. But as stated before, the bad track record of failing with aiding foreign nations is too significant to gloss over, which could be explained given Nadine's reckless tendencies. Which, when also paired with Rafe, it may just make things even worse for them. But their numbers, skill and versatility as well as potential resources is too good to place them any lower than 3rd. Shoreline gets 8 points. In 2nd place, I gotta give the silver reward to the Order here. Government and historical influence as well as advanced training and experience is too much for me to gloss over. Talbot's insane amounts of skill as well as his development being an anti-Drake also makes him potentially the deadliest person mentioned, especially when considering the Order's more laid-back spy shtick that carries the great potential destroying some of these armies internally. Plus, one of the highest numbers makes them serviceable too. The only drawback is that they lack variety by significant amounts in terms of vehicles. No aerial or aquatic vehicles and no advanced terrestrial vehicles makes them severely lacking compared to Shoreline. But all in all, their strategies are too deadly to ignore, so I give them the slight edge over Shoreline and 9 points. In 1st place, we gotta give the gold to Zoran once again. His victories in Nepal as well as influence across Europe instantly puts him above everyone else by significant amounts. Add that to his ruthlessness, his spy experience, army size, and exceptionally powerful vehicles makes him more than a match for everyone here. He gets yet another 10 points. So, let's tally up the results right here. So yeah, there you have it. That's my analysis of who is more than likely to win out of the armies in the Uncharted franchise. Let me know your thoughts in the comments and feel free to ask me any questions. I'm more than willing to answer them to the best of my ability. Keep in mind, however, this is all just my opinion. I didn't write any of these armies, so I could be wrong with some of my statements here. I mean, as seen, not all the points make sense here. Dante's points are lower than Guerrero's, even though in the game Dante defeated Guerrero's army. These points aren't exactly overall scores, they're more so labels of plausibility of who'd win, not definite answers. Miracles could definitely happen here, none of these points are certain. I'd say if the opposing team has more than 5 points, then it won't go either way. But if they carry less than 5 more points, like for instance Marlon Talbot have 33 points and Rafe Shoreline have 34 points, they're just 1 point apart, which means it definitely could go either way. If they're more than 5 points apart, then nah, it definitely can't go either way. This is easily my longest video thus far, and it took so long to make and write this, so don't expect the next video to be too long. That's all I have to say for now, and so as always, thank you for watching and have a quirktastic day.